Hi there, I am Posture Ellie and I am doing one of my postural assessment walkthroughs. So I did one about a year ago now where I had a few of my Instagram followers send me their posture pictures and I did a bit of a video run through of what it is that I'm looking at when I'm studying people's posture. I think it's worth saying that the pictures can only tell you so much of the story. So when I'm dealing with people one-to-one, the pictures are literally only part of what I am assessing and what I'm looking at, but they are very, very helpful. So these kind of stationary posture pictures that I ask people to send to me before their appointments give me loads of clues as to where I want to go during the appointment, what exercises, what assessments I might get that person doing. They are a springboard onto how I deal with the person. They are not conclusive in themselves. So I do want to say that before we begin, that I'm going to walk you through these sort of postural deviations and the things that I see in these people's postures. But it's not to say that because this person looks like they have a sort of lifted left shoulder, that that's necessarily the first thing that I would be going after if I had an appointment with them, because actually it might be that that left shoulder changes if I wake up their right hip or something like that. So this is very much the sort of beginning of the process when I'm working with people one-to-one, but it does help open doors, get the people thinking a bit differently, and can just be really illuminating. So it's not until you have your pictures taken that often you realize sort of how wonky and imbalanced you are. It also goes to say that I don't know anything about these people. So I have their pictures. I don't know what pains they have, even if they have any pains. Some of them might be feeling absolutely fine at the moment. So I'm not sort of looking at these pictures and judging them and saying that they should be in lots of pain. I am simply using my postural assessment tools to sort of tell you, and you will be able to see it objectively, where they are wonky, where there is imbalance. And it also, I want to say that just because I'm assessing people's posture, I do not think that I have perfect posture. So there is such thing as perfect posture, which basically means that all of the muscles in your body work exactly at their full capacity. So you literally have like 100% muscular function. It's a possibility. I don't really believe that that many people in the world have it, and I certainly don't. So I have loads of stuff going on. I don't have any pain, but posturally I do have wonky bits. So I'm not looking at people and judging them and thinking that I'm above them. I'm a human. I've lived a predominantly Western lifestyle for sort of most of my life. It's only in the last few years since I've been doing this that my lifestyle's really changed. So I am working with all of this stuff too. I just want to reassure you, just because you're wonky or whatever, you are no different to anybody else. We all are. But our goal is to move towards this postural perfection. We are moving towards muscular function, and being perfect with your posture is not really about how you look at all. It's how you move. It's how well, how balanced, how efficient you are when you move. Are the muscles doing the right jobs, or are you compensating? And what happens is that when we have this fully balanced body, this fully functional body, we look good because it's a byproduct of balance and function. The muscles are doing what they should be doing, therefore those stubborn bits of your body that always maybe look a bit chubby or whatever, they start to tone up as the body becomes more functional and things are doing what they should be doing. So you will look better if you have better posture. But when I'm talking about good posture, it isn't actually about how the person looks at all. It's about how they move. How they look is a reflection and byproduct of what their muscles are doing. So hopefully that's a good caveat, just in that, you know, this is just one part of the process. These are the pictures. This is where we start from. And a lot more would be going into this if I was dealing with these people one-to-one. So enough talking from me. Let's share my screen. And, oh, I thought I had the right thing up. That's a really good start. And we're going to bring up the people's postures that I have prepared in front of me here. So I've got 5 people's posture that have been sent through to me today. Like I said, I don't know any of these people at all. They've just been sent through to me. I've got no idea what's going on with their body, if they are in pain or what pain they have. I've got no idea of their lifestyles or their history, what accidents they may have had, and all of these things massively imprint in your bodies. So it is just purely observational, going off what I see in these pictures. Firstly, what I'll say is I'll just explain about how I set these pictures up. So in the front and back picture, I put that plumb line, so the central line, I put that in the middle of the person's feet. So it's not putting it in the middle of the nose or putting it in the middle of the belly button. We're putting it in the middle of the person's feet, more or less, to get a gauge of where their center of gravity may be going wrong further upstream. So this man actually happens to have his line going through his belly button, but for lots of people, their belly button will sort of be off if they are offset to one side. So in the front and back picture, that line is in the middle of the feet. And in the side-on picture, I put it through the middle of the ankle bone that we see on the outside. So that line starts off in the middle of that sort of ankle bone bit, and it goes up all the way through the body. And actually, this man is a fairly good example of good stacking side on, because you can see on his left-hand side, especially, we've got stacking through his ankle, the middle of his knee, the middle of his pelvis, the middle of his shoulder. It should be the ear. It's very, very rare that you actually see a head back over the body, but his left ear is not too far off the line. The right one is a little bit of a different story. So I'll get to that in a minute. When I'm looking at someone's posture, and if this man was coming to have an appointment with me, firstly, I don't like to highlight absolutely everything that is going on, because if you highlight everything, it can be actually really quite overwhelming. Because the body adapts as a unit, you can't have your foot go wrong without the knee going wrong, without the hip going wrong, without the pelvis going wrong, without the spine going wrong, etc., etc. So you can't just have like a postural deviation in isolation, because everything around it is adapting and reacting. But what I do with my clients is I will tell them the sort of the 3 to 5 most standout things to me. So it's the things that I believe that if we dig a little deeper and get them doing some exercises and stuff, may make the most impactful change the most quickly. So I am not listing everything that I see here. I am listing what jumps out to me the most, which might be, if you were another postural alignment therapist looking at this, you may see something different. So this is like more of an art, I think, than a science. People will see things differently, and certain people will have certain things jump out to them more than others. So I'm going to give you sort of 3 to 5 things for each of the 5 postures that we're looking at today that stand out to me. I'm not listing everything. And this is something where somebody else could see these pictures and perhaps think differently to me, but the truth would come out when we started getting him moving and seeing how his body reacted. So the first thing I would say that jumps out to me with this man is, if we look, oh, hold on, I'm going to do my favorite thing of trying to annotate, but I'm really quite bad at annotation. So the first thing that jumps out to me when I look at this man's body is this area here. When we look at him from behind, is the most kind of clear way of seeing this. So this section here tells me, or suggests to me, that he is elevated through the right hand side of his pelvis. And so by pelvic elevation, what it means is that one side of his pelvis is higher than the other. So if you were to imagine his sort of pelvic girdle, on that right hand side, his right side of his pelvis is higher than his left. So he's going to likely be bearing more load through his left leg, because it's more grounded down. I could be wrong, but it's that he's definitely elevated through the right hand side of his pelvis. What happens with that elevation through his pelvis, also comes congestion in that like waist rib cage area. So here, because the pelvis is lifted, he is like pinched kind of sideways through the side of his ribs and into his waist. And I suspect we would find that this guy has a tight hip on that right hand side, really. I think that it's tightness through his hip flexor that's sort of pinching him up in that region there. So yeah, right pelvic elevation, and as I said, sort of congestion, same thing causing it, as he's sort of being almost pulled downwards slightly on that right hand side in that waist area. From the side, there's also something different going on between his left side view and his right side view through his spine, and it's probably the same thing that's causing his right pelvic elevation. On both sides of his spine, he has what we call thoracic flexion or kyphosis, which basically just means like rounding of the upper back like this. Basically, everybody has this to a certain degree, just because of our lifestyles. We sit down a lot, we sort of hunch over a lot, we're at desks, cars, etc., etc. So he's got this thoracic flexion on both sides. So I would want to be looking at how strong he is in this sort of mid-back shoulder section here. I suspect if his muscles in the mid-back were a bit stronger, his whole shoulder and like head and neck would be pulled back over those shoulders a little bit better. But what I'm curious about is the difference from side to side. There's something, and again, it's this same area here that I was seeing from behind. It looks different here in comparison to that left-hand side. He just looks almost like a bit, possibly more developed in the muscles that are running superficially on the right-hand side of his back, which may be a compensation because of what's happening beneath that. So there's something going on that right-hand side where he just looks a little bit more developed, but not necessarily in a good way. It looks like sort of overworked to me. I would be intrigued to know where this man's symptoms are, because I'm sort of thinking his right shoulder, his right waist, maybe somewhere where he feels some pain, but I don't know. But we've also, as I sort of said at the beginning, we've got this ear that's really quite far forward of that shoulder girdle, which he doesn't have on that left-hand side. So his ear on that right-hand side is further forward, which tells me that there is some rotation going on through his body. So maybe it's his pelvis that's twisting forwards on that right-hand side, as well as lifting up. Maybe it's his rib cage. But actually, from looking at his rib cage position, I suspect that he actually is counter-rotated left side forwards. Yeah, I suspect that he is, I don't know what's going on here, but I think his tight hip on that right-hand side is almost pinching him forwards and pitching his upper body forwards as well. That right shoulder also looks like it's a bit trapped and further forwards than the left. So just to go back to that counter rotation thing that I mentioned, when I'm looking at rotation through the body. So when I said his right side of his ear, sorry, his right side of his ear, his right ear is further off the plumb line. I'm like, okay, so what's causing that? Is that the shoulder position? Is it the rib cage position? Is it his pelvis? Is it his legs? And what I suspect for him is that actually his left side of his rib cage twists forwards. So I'll just draw that from behind. So I want you to imagine that the left side of his ribs are further forwards than his right, which kind of also feeds into where that pinching is happening through the right-hand side. And the reason that I say that is when I was looking at him here at the front, if we look at the front view picture, I just get a sense that his rib cage looks like it's twisted forwards more to that left-hand side. And then I suspect that that right shoulder has sort of counter rotated on top of it. So it's almost like he's got a twist going on through his pelvis, through to his rib cage, and through to his shoulders and to his head. So just to summarize what I've said about this guy here, if he was my client, I'd be asking serious questions about what's going on with that elevation through the right side of his pelvis, pinching through that rib cage and waist on that right hand side, rotation forwards through his left rib cage, and then it's almost like rotation forwards again through his right shoulder, which looks like it's stuck forwards, and then it sort of, that might be what's causing his head to pitch forward. So this isn't giving this man answers, but it's telling him what I see, and it would be I'd be starting to ask myself questions moving on in the appointment from here on in, as to what it was that I wanted to explore with this guy. So hopefully that makes sense for him. Oh, I need to get rid of the annotation tool. So why does it want me to load this every time? How annoying. Okay. So now we have got a young lad who has been sent in. So for this young boy, we have got rather a lot of rotation going on for sure. So I have to say that his pictures are slightly wonky. I still can see clearly what's going on, but you can see at the bottom with the floor that it's slightly like sloped, which does skew the photo slightly. It's not a massive deal to me, but it can just make it harder as time goes on. When we are progressing and we take side-by-side pictures, you can't get quite such a good comparison if the floor's wonky, but I can see what's going on. So do bear that in mind. The floor being wonky and the picture being slightly wonky does throw his body off a little bit more. So for this boy, there is quite a lot of rotation going on, and it's a question of figuring out where you would want to start. And I'm very drawn to his right leg, his right kneecap, and I get a sense that his body looks like it's avoiding his right leg. So that's kind of where I'm going to start with. So if we zoom in on his knees here, both of his kneecaps are in a position of what we call internal rotation. So here's the kneecap, and they are facing in internal rotation. And the kneecap is really a window to the femur, the thigh bone, and the hip. So the kneecap is, you know, it's a messenger in the middle. It's not actually the kind of problem in itself. So he has got internal rotation on both sides of his knees and of his hips, which tells me that he lacks stability around his hips and pelvis, but he is more rotated inwards in that right kneecap, which suggests that he is more unstable through that right leg. As I said at the beginning, I don't know this guy's history. I don't know what he's been up to or if he's had any accidents, but I would kind of be wondering if maybe he's had like a break or something, or an injury to his right leg at some point, because it just looks to me like his right leg is just sort of really collapsing in, and he looks like he wants to take his body weight to the left hand side, which is another tell for when somebody is avoiding wanting to walk through one leg. So if we look at him from behind, yes, the picture is wonky, but you can really see how he's kind of avoiding that right foot and putting more weight on that left hand side, which kind of looks like it's turned into this twist through the left hand side of his pelvis. So the very clearest thing that we can see in terms of this rotation is you can get a sense of it from that front and back picture, but have a look at his side on pictures. So yes, the pictures are wonky, which will change things slightly, but I think this is happening anyway. On that left leg, that knee is really flexed, so it's bent constantly. He will walk and not be able to straighten that left knee in the side view. So he's stuck in knee flexion, and look at how much further forward his pelvis is here on this left-hand side versus the right-hand side. So actually on the right side view picture, he's stacking kind of more or less okay through the center of the ankle, center of the knee, center of the pelvis, set my shoulders a bit off, but it's not too bad. Whereas on that left-hand side, his whole body is veering off that vertical plumb line, and the left side of the pelvis is definitely further forwards than the right. He's also got a disparity in his kind of lumbar lower back region, which would suggest to me that there's something, I suspect he's a bit tighter through his left hip than he is his right. I can just see more of a lordosis there, which would be caused by the hip flexor sort of pulling him forwards. And I wonder if I change my mind about the hypothesis, seeing these other things. I don't know. I'll say again what I've said and then continue up the body, and then I'll come up with like an idea. But yeah, looks unstable through that right leg and like he's avoiding it in the front and the back view, and he's got that internal kneecap. Then when we see the left side view picture, he's got that heavy flex through the left knee, and he's got that twisting forwards of the left pelvis, which is also suggestive of instability through the left-hand side. And I kind of wonder, sorry, I deliberately didn't look at these pictures in great detail beforehand because I wanted you to capture my sort of of initial reactions to the videos. Yeah, okay, I'm not going to make any hypothesis. This is slightly confusing. I would definitely want to test him. So he's rotated forwards through the left-hand side of his pelvis. I suspect he's going to be more pinched through that left hip. Possibly it's that's causing that bending through the left knee. And he has got pretty winged scapula, which basically means we can kind of see this like point here where the scapula are not sitting comfortably against the rib cage. So it might be a shoulder problem, but it is also sometimes like a rib cage position problem. So if the rib cage is being held out of position by a wonky pelvis or wonky hips or wonky feet, the rib cage needs to be kind of reset before the shoulders can sort of settle into a better position. And from what I can see, but it's not necessarily the case just because of where that line is in the back picture, he looks like he's more winged through that left shoulder. But yeah, he's got work to be done on his upper body, but I'm very curious as to what is happening with this right hip. Why is that twisting his knee inwards? And why is he so far forwards on this left-hand side of his pelvis? Yeah, I'm going to say my hypothesis here is that he's kind of tighter through his left hip pelvic area. And that's like pulling him forwards in that way. And I suspect he's more unstable through his right leg. And that's created a kind of overload through his left-hand side. But interesting, I would definitely want to get this boy doing some tests and sort of figure out what is causing what. But it's more his lower body here that I'm really looking at, even though there is disparity in his upper body for sure. It's the lower body that's standing out to me more, which, to be honest, is the case normally for most people. Okay, what else have we got here? Okay, so we have a lady now, and this lady is not relaxing her hands. So we can't make very conclusive, well, as I said, none of this is conclusive, but I can't really say that much about her hands, arms, and shoulders because she's not relaxing her hands. So she's like holding herself with like soldier's posture, which isn't a natural standing relaxed posture. So I have to kind of ignore almost what her hands and arms are doing because that's not it's not indicative of what she's actually like when she moves. She's definitely got a femur disparity, so a hip disparity, and I suspect a pelvic disparity as well. So if we zoom in through her legs here, what we see is that her right kneecap looks like it's facing straight ahead. So this kneecap here, a little bit internal actually, but not really. For the purpose of simplicity, I'm just going to say that right kneecap is facing straight ahead, but the left kneecap is internal. So this left kneecap sort of faces in that direction. At the same time, I also see, and when I work with my clients, I get them sending more detailed foot pictures and stuff, which I haven't done for this. So I would know a little bit more about their feet before I had the appointment, but she looks like she's kind of like collapsing inwards on that left foot. She looks like she's probably got a flatter arch on that left foot than she does on the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side, I get a sense of, I'm just going to clear what I've just done there. There's a twist on both of her lower legs, really, but maybe more so on that right-hand side. So her right kneecap faces straight ahead, more or less, but there's a real torsion through her lower leg feeding into the ankle. So you kind of get this sense of like twisting through the tibia and the fibula. She looks to me like she's probably got a higher, more rigid arch through her right foot. So she kind of looks a bit like stiff, I would say, through that right leg, but on the left leg, she looks like she collapses into the foot. So just to recap that, she has got femur disparity, which means her hips up here are doing something. Oh, I've got my thing on the screen. Her hips up here are doing something different from side to side. And I suspect that is also to do with the pelvic disparity. The way that we see that, the way that we know that is by looking through and seeing what her kneecaps, her ankles, and her feet are doing. So her feet may also work differently as well. I think it's being led from the pelvis. So the left knee rotates inwards. The right knee rotates inwards a little bit, but not quite so much. We have this strong torsion through the right lower leg, and there is also torsion through the left lower leg, but it doesn't look quite so muscular and stiff almost. She looks like she's kind of collapsing through that left lower leg, whereas she looks wound up and a bit tighter on that right hand side. And it's just little things you're kind of looking for. Like when I look at her, and yes, it might be the light, and yes, these pictures could be better, but we just see stronger definition of the muscles on that right hand side. We see like veins kind of coming down into her feet. She just looks like this area of her body works more than this area of her body. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe there is something going on with her, like left foot, left ankle not being very powerful, and maybe this leg has kind of like switched itself off slightly, and she overloads possibly through that right hand side. To the pelvic disparity, so if we scooch up her body here from the front view, we can see a bit like the man at the beginning, but she has got a higher, oh, that was an absolutely terrible straight line. She has got a higher pelvis on that right hand side than she does the left. Now, when it comes to this postural deviation, which like off the top of my head, I would say is pelvic elevation, we see that the right side of the pelvis is higher than the left. It's not always the case that it is pelvic elevation. So pelvic elevation is this, where one side is higher than the other. A pelvic disparity is when one side of the pelvis tilts forwards more or less than the other side. So you have it in the kind of side-on view that one side is further forward than the other. That might be what's going on with her. So why can't I zoom out of this picture now? Okay, ooh, too much zooming out. Okay, so I would say that her left side view picture by all accounts is pretty good. She's a little bit anterior through both sides of her pelvis. So anterior is when the front side of the pelvis is kind of lower than the back, and it puts a little bit too much strain on the lower back, and then the rib cage kind of flares up. This is definitely me for sure. But generally speaking, her left-hand side on the side view doesn't look too bad. Her right-hand side, to be honest, doesn't look that bad either. But what I do see is that she just looks a bit more pinched, like through her right lower back, and through the right side of her pelvis than she does on her left. So I suspect that she's anterior in her pelvic tilt on both sides, but I think she's more anterior on her right hand side. So if you want to imagine, say, that the pelvis is like there at that type of angle on her right hand side, whereas on her left hand side it's more like that, so it's not quite so extreme. And that might be what we see in this like front view. It might not be that the right hand side of the pelvis is higher, it might be that it's more like pinched forwards. So I said I wasn't really going to comment on her upper body just because the hands being stiff like throws them off, but there's not like a great deal, to be honest, that I see in her upper body. So just as well, but it might be her hand position that's meaning that I don't see stuff. But she looks like she's a little bit higher through her left shoulder at the front, and she's like a little bit rounded in her shoulders, but like all in all, I think her shoulder kind of neck head position is pretty good. I am looking at her legs and her pelvis. So if she was my client, I think I would be asking some serious questions about how well she moved through that left foot. I wonder if she doesn't big toe off very well through her left foot. So she's not like winding up the arch of the foot, which then feeds through to the hip on that left-hand side. And I suspect that her right-hand side has become like tighter and kind of overworked, hence this like pinching up round here. And I'm drawing on vaguely where the hip flexor would go. And then, you know, the same hip flexor, this is how we see it in the side view, because it connects at the bottom of the rib cage at the back and comes through to the groin. I reckon that muscle's pretty tight. It's like holding her right leg quite rigidly in place. And I think that's where that sort of overwork is coming through from the right knee downwards. So I think for me, I would be looking to see what happens when we woke up her left foot a bit differently and see if that created more stability through the left leg so that the right hand side could switch off. Number 4. Okay, so this man takes very little what's the word? I don't have to wait for too long before my immediate thoughts sort of come up here. What is going on through his especially left leg, but definitely his right leg as well. So this man has like the opposite of the lady and the boy in that he has very external knee rotation. So his hips are super trapped in an externally rotated position like that. And that left one and that left foot more so than the right hand side, but both of them have got quite a lot going on there. So yeah, 100%, that's the first thing that jumps out to me. His external hip rotation, it tells me that his hips are trapped in that position, and his feet are also trapped in that external position, worse on that left hand side than it is on the right. Why does this happen? This happens more often than not when someone is not engaging enough through the adductor muscles, through the sort of middle of their thighs, sorry, the middle of their legs like this, and also from their hip flexors. So this is somebody who is recruiting the wrong muscles to move their leg forward, and it's kind of twisting the knees out to the side. If I was going to hazard a guess for this man, if he had symptoms, I'd be thinking something going on in his right arm, so right shoulder, right elbow, right wrist, or right hand. I suspect he'd have something, and probably knees, and he would probably have something like piriformis syndrome, or, you know, like tightness in his glutes. So when the knees are this rotated, the external rotators of the hip, many of them located deep within the glutes, will be like locked on and super, super tight. So I don't know, I could be completely wrong, but I would be thinking stuff like that. So for him, we would definitely want to see what happens when we woke up his hip flexors and started to engage differently through the feet. If I zoom in on his feet, he has got very rigid high arches. So I can see there that his foot is really stuck in a position of supination. So it's like the opposite of that last lady who had the collapse through her foot. This foot puts most of the weight on the outside kind of edge, very rigid high arches, and he has problems, will have problems pronating, I suspect. And you can see here that he's got quite a lot of clawing going on through his toes. So his toes are compensating for probably a lack of hip stability. And actually you can see quite nicely in this side view picture here how his toes have sort of formed themselves. It's to do with how his foot interacts with the ground. And I suspect that a lot of that clawing has come from a lack of stability in his hips. For me, he is like red alert. Let's wake up this man's hip flexors and see what happens, because I think he'd feel quite different. He has actually got probably a little bit of pelvic elevation or pelvic disparity on that right hand side. I'm trying to get my annotation tool up. Oh, didn't mean, God, what am I doing? Absolute nightmare. Annotate, here we go. So we can see here the dimples of Venus, which are like the holes of the sacroiliac area. And you can see that that right side is slightly higher than the left. It's not as prominent, I would say, as other people that we've seen today. But you can also just sort of tell by his waist and things that he is lifted through that right-hand side, which actually may well be where that left leg has gone wrong. If he's potentially loading his left leg a bit more, if he's higher on that right-hand side, he may put more weight through that left leg, and that might be why the left leg has shown more signs of sort of like structural issues almost. So like in his lower region here from the back, you can see how that left ankle is like wider than his left knee. It's like he's more collapsed through that left leg than he is the right hand side, and it could be that right pelvic elevation that is causing that. You can also see here that he's got some scoliosis of the spine. So in that rear view picture, if we sort of track the line of where his spine goes, you can see that deviation to the side. Scoliosis is a postural issue. So lots of people think that scoliosis is some like thing that like people are born with or whatever. And yes, there might be some people that are born with scoliosis, but more often than not, it's a compensation due to like wonkiness through the hips and through the pelvis. So if the pelvis and the hips can't move in a balanced way, and that might start happening from a very young age. So you might have had scoliosis since you were 12 or whatever, but it doesn't mean that you were born with it. If the pelvis and the hips can't move in the same way from side to side, the spine has to like compensate and adapt. And it's almost giving you that rotation and movement that's not happening further downstream. So he's got the scoliosis here, and he's probably in that case going to have, I want to have a look at his rib cage. Yeah, I think he is also rotated forwards through the left hand side of his rib cage. So if I look at him in the front here and I just sort of look at his front torso area, I suspect he's a bit further forwards through the right and the left hand side of his rib cage. His right shoulder looks very trapped to me. So the right shoulder is kind of like dropped in that front view. The right hand is further forwards than the left hand in that front view. And from the side, so I'm having problems zooming out. I'm causing myself trying to be too technical here with the annotations. And from this side, I'm getting strong signals from his right shoulder here that it's probably not very happy. So if I zoom out again, that right shoulder is definitely further forwards than his left one is, or at least more out of position. Oh my God, I'm having a nightmare here, than his left one is. So if you look at his shoulders in his front view picture, you can see how it's like twisted inwards, that humerus, the upper arm looks very trapped, the shoulder looks dropped. And from the side view, you can see how much that like tension through the front of his chest and shoulder is sort of pulling him forwards. And from the back, you can still see that like drop through the right shoulder. So the arm is sort of so far forwards of the rib cage that you don't really see the shoulder properly there. So all of these things are going to be connected. They're all intertwined with one another. I don't know what I think about him in terms of like what I think is causing what. Again, it would come down to testing, but certainly, why are his knees and his feet so external? Why are his feet so rigid in that like supination position? Why is the right side of his pelvis higher than the left? Why does his left side of his rib cage twist forwards? And why is his right shoulder so tight? I also suspect, and I have a theory that I think it's to do with driving personally, but I also kind of suspect for him that he's going to be much tighter through his right hip than he is his left-hand side, but that his left-hand side has started to sort of overload because of that tightness through the hip. So a little bit like that man at the beginning, this guy, oh my God, where is my annotation tool? Here we go. This guy looks like pinched here. So we've got that lifting through the pelvis. We've got the way that the shoulder is dropped down. We can just see a bit more of like a pinch here through his torso. He looks congested in that right hip region. And I suspect that the like elevation through that right hand side is going to be putting more load through his left leg, which is then creating this sort of like sideways out collapse of his lower leg. And so he's probably going to have something like pain maybe going on through that left knee, left foot, maybe, I'm not sure. But I don't know what's caused it. I'd have to get him doing some things and I could then try and figure it out. But that's that man's posture. And then we've got one final set of, oh my God, I'm having an absolute nightmare. Sorry. We're got the final set of pictures and we have this man. So I'm just going to say before I forget that annoyingly, my software doesn't always like perfectly fit the pictures in. So nothing wrong with these photos at all, but you can see that I couldn't stack this man's left picture through the center of his ankle. So it's nothing he's done wrong, but sometimes the software decides that it doesn't like the pictures. So just ignore that. Basically, we have to pretend that the line is going through his ankle. And if I draw it on now, you can see, yes, his like left ear is coming forwards of that line, and more so than it is on that right hand side actually. So hold on a minute. I'm going to start again there. Bring your shared window to the front. I don't know what I'm going to start this again. Okay. Okay, now I'm screen sharing. Sorry, there was an issue there. So I'll start again. And I'll cut out the bit that just went wrong. So I have to say with this guy that he has done nothing wrong with his pictures, but for some reason my software doesn't sometimes like the pictures of people, it doesn't fit them properly. So I couldn't stack his left side of his ankle over that plumb line, annoyingly. But if I draw it on with this line here, you can see how his head is like further forwards of his shoulders on that left-hand side. But it's not like horrifically bad in comparison to some people with how far forward their head is. So with this guy, he has got a left pelvic elevation. So the left-hand side of his pelvis is higher than his right here. Let me just get my annotation tool. So we've got left side is higher than the right, and you can see that quite clearly in both the front and the back view. He also, along with that left pelvic elevation, has an elevated left shoulder. So his left shoulder is quite a lot higher. If you just sort of look at my line there to compare it to, his left shoulder is quite a lot higher than his right shoulder. And I suspect that that probably follows the trajectory of what his pelvis is doing below it. So because his pelvis is lifted on that left-hand side, so is his left shoulder as well. I'd also say that I think his left arm looks a bit trapped. So if we're looking at kind of the armpits of the elbows here, we ideally would want these kind of facing straight ahead, facing the camera. And this one's like not perfect, but not too bad. But this one is really like facing internally. And you just get a sense, if you look in this section here, that his left humerus is like more stuck against his kind of rib cage. It just looks more trapped to me. And we see more of the front of his left hand than we do his right. So we want it to be that when our hands are hanging by our sides, that we see the side of the hands like this, and we see a lot of the front of his left hand. So that left arm looks fairly stuck to me. If I was going to make a guess, I would suspect that he would be having issues with his left arm in some capacity, be it shoulder, elbow, wrist or hand, neck, maybe. That neck's going to be taking quite a lot of strain because of where that shoulder position is. So his left side of his pelvis is elevated, the left shoulder is elevated, the left arm looks stuck to me, and he has got a little bit like the lady that was in the pictures. He has got what we call tibial torsion, which is a twist from the kneecap, aka the hip, down to the foot, but his is a different tibial torsion. So she had internal kneecaps feeding down through to her feet. This man has external kneecaps, so they're facing off in this direction, and his feet are external, but they're not quite so as external as his kneecap. So therefore that's where the torsion comes in, and there's a twist from his knee down to his feet, and you can see that kind of this effect through the lower leg. So tibial torsion is, I would say for me nowadays, the way that I recognize it the most is actually just imagining like the shin bone below the knee, and you can see that like twist through there, versus someone who doesn't have tibial torsion and it's just like it's stacking straight. So this rotation through his lower leg is going to be causing him problems, I would say. because his feet can't talk effectively to his hips. It's like his feet cannot communicate with his hips when they are in this position, when we've got the disjointedness of the tibial torsion, and when the kneecaps are facing out in that direction. So I would definitely, with this guy, be looking at what are his feet and his calves doing, how well do they work. I would also be asking questions as to why is the left pelvis higher than the right, what's causing that? Why is his left shoulder stuck? I suspect that's to do with his pelvis. And from the sides, it's also quite clear that he needs to do some thoracic work. So he needs to wake up the muscles of this section of his back. He looks like he's putting a lot of kind of pressure through that lower back. The way that he stands, he's kind of really sinking into his lower back. And if you look at the kind of direction of his rib cage below it, the rib cage is flaring upwards. We've got this pressure into his lower back. And I suspect that for him, as well as what I said about his feet and his hips, I would want to be doing a lot of work to strengthen him up in this mid-back area, because I think that would help change his rib cage tilt, get his shoulders back where they should, and also get his head back over the rest of his body. So those were my 5 pictures. I hope you found that helpful. As I said at the beginning, this is just the first step. So the pictures tell me certain things, but it's more suggesting things to me rather than me being able to make anything conclusive. As you've sort of seen, as I go through this process, I'm constantly asking myself questions. I change my mind a bit, but it leads me as to where I want to go in the appointment to see what creates change for this person, what makes them feel better, what makes them feel worse, and therefore what exercises can I give them to do in their own time that are going to help start to bring that body back into balance. So for example, with this man, you know, the next time that he had an appointment with me, I would be hoping that we would see that his kneecaps are facing a bit straighter ahead, his feet are facing a bit straighter ahead, the left pelvis is a little bit further down, more balanced with the right, and that left shoulder looks a little bit less trapped. It wouldn't be perfect, but very quickly you would be surprised at how different people can start looking. And like I said at the beginning, I don't care how people look, I care how people feel and how their bodies move. And if your body moves well and efficiently and with balance, you will look good because everything's holding itself properly. So yeah, so hopefully that was helpful, and that I can figure out the bit that went wrong when I thought I was screen sharing, but I wasn't. But I'll see you guys soon. Keep your eyes peeled on my YouTube and follow me on Instagram at posture.ellie. Bye.